What's going on, everyone? Today we are talking all things about the 2025 Houston Texans, including how many wide receivers you should be taking ahead of Nico Collins in Fantasyland, if Nick Chubb will actually be a thorn in the side of Joe Mixon's fantasy managers, can Stroud respond from a, yes, QB 28 finish in fantasy points per game, all that and so much more here on today's Fantasy Life show. And accordingly, I am joined by Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, all-around baller, Dwain The Rock McFarland. So Dwain, going to open things up with a simple question. How many wide receivers would you confidently say have a higher best case scenario than Nico Collins? Because honestly, you might not have to name anyone.
Yeah, I mean, he's right there in the tiers. So I ran the ceiling floor logic, reran it based on all the new projections this morning. Jamar Chase is first at 25. CeeDee Lamb's right behind him at 24.9. Puka Nacua is right behind that at 24.6. Then you got Justin Jefferson right there. Then you have Nico Collins at 23.6. So, I mean, he's in the top five, and you could argue like, okay, we're talking about between 25 and 24 fantasy points projected as their ceiling in a PPR league. Like, that's really good. He's already scored 17.2 and 17.6 over the last 2 years, and his underlying data also supports that. Ian, 2.87 and 3.10 yards per route run. That's what we like to call Julio Jones territory. So here are the guys, Ian, in their first 4 years in the league since 2011 that scored 17 plus fantasy points per game. A.J. Brown, we like that player. A.J. Green, wow, we really like that player. Alshon Jeffrey had some good years, guys. Okay, Hear me out. CeeDee Lamb, Demaryius Thomas, Dez Bryant, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Michael Thomas, OBJ, and Puka Nacua. That's a pretty good list to be on. Yeah, Nico Collins could be the wide receiver one this year. It could happen.
I have drafted Nico Collins more than any other wide receiver not named Darius Slayton this year. And I know people might hear that and go, wait, why is Nico next to Darius? It is so hard to get someone like Nico Collins, who's regularly gone at the end of round one, early parts of round two, on as many fantasy teams that I have managed to do so far, Dwain. Some might even call it irresponsible, considering I'm taking him ahead of, other guys who are regularly going inside the top 15. I cannot get the thought out of my head that if this guy stays healthy, all those other wide receivers that you did say have the better, higher case ceiling, okay, that's fine. I don't necessarily disagree, but at the same time, Christian Kirk, Jaden Higgins, we have lesser competition at the wide receiver 2 spot here in Houston than any other part. You mentioned Julio in terms of the yards per route run. Watch Nico play over the past 2 years, man. This dude is legit Julio light, and I do not say that lightly, no pun intended. Overall wide receiver 1 ceiling is firmly in this dude's grasp. And sometimes you can give him the early parts of round 2. I don't want to be a broken record here and say, oh, there's Achane, there's all these guys that, we love in round 2. Yeah, no crap. We love every single player that's a top 20 overall ADP. That's why they're going so high to begin with. But man, Dwain, I've gone out of my way for Nico Collins. And barring an injury, man, I just don't see what we could even be missing here.
Yeah, no, I'm fully down for it. Obviously, like we'll see what happens. We'll talk about the rookies more here in a second with Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel. You added Christian Kirk, but still, to your point, like I think Nico's the very clear number one target earner on the team. We've got CJ Stroud, who's had one really good season, one not so good season. Truth's probably somewhere in the middle, but obviously he and Stroud, like they have chemistry. These last 2 years, we've got the 17.2 and 17.6 fantasy points per game. So feel really good about it. I would just say we're living in a time, and I've said this multiple times, where it's just a wonderful time to be alive as fantasy players because we have so many good young wide receiver talents. There are other runouts where Nico doesn't kind of hit his stride at the same time, and he hits it, with a different group of receivers, where we would be ranking Nico Collins as high as the wide receiver 3. He just happens to be at a time where we've got Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb and Puka Nacua. We got Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors. So to your point, you've drafted him a ton. I can't really argue with it. I'm mixing him in with Brian Thomas Jr. Those two I've pretty much got even. I look at them very similarly. So, but I do like both of them slightly better than Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors, no argument on the talent, but I do have a little bit more concern about the quarterback.
Projected for just the 8th most targets this year. I say just the 8th most because those are rookie numbers, Dwain. Come on, throw me a bone here and get that man inside the top 5. I am the highest of any fantasy life ranker on Nico Collins. He comes in as my wide receiver 4. Yes, even ahead of the great Puka Nacua. Again, just a play really on the potential for Nico to truly take over this entire passing game, whereas Puka is going to be amazing. That's why he's my wide receiver 5 overall, but we do have Devontae Adams in town as well to at least worry somewhat about. So all the love in the world for Nico Collins. Yeah, we love the guy. What's going on with the rest of the group, though, Dwain? Again, we have the pair of Iowa State Cyclones. Christian Kirk is in town as well. Maybe you even have a John Mechie take to get off your chest. Have you been drafting any of these other more complimentary wide receivers with any level of, consistency?
I mean, Higgins and Christian Kirk, I do draft. I think Higgins is like this cheap entry point to the Texans offense. If you do think that they're going to rebound and that you think CJ Stroud is really more like what you saw in year one than what you saw last year when he was the QB 28 in fantasy football. If we look at the supermodel with Higgins, he graded out with a supermodel rating of 77. If we look at the hit rates on players like that, they've gone on to have a top 12 finish in their first 3 years, 11% of the time, top 24 finish, 30% of the time, top 36 finish, 43% of the time in the first 3 years. So not a slam dunk by any means, but, there's definitely some upside there for Higgins. And I think if he can win that number 2 role, that's the key thing we've got to watch in camp, because I think people are immediately ruling out that Christian Kirk won't be the guy on the field in 2 wide receiver sets, and he can do that. He's done that in the past. Yes, he will kick inside to the slot whenever they go to 3 wide, but that's the big thing. If Jaden Higgins can win that number 2 role, so whenever they're playing in those 2 wide receiver sets, I think that's going to be a big thing for him. Don't want to forget his college teammate either, Jalen Noel. I think it's going to be a little tougher for him to get on the field early in the year, but man, would we be surprised if later in the year, maybe whatever. We don't want injuries. Christian Kirk has to miss a little bit of time. Suddenly Jalen Noel gets to play for 3 games, and then we just don't ever hear from Christian Kirk again. Like, if you guys have watched Jalen Noel play, very fun player to watch with the ball in his hands after the catch. So I think these are all positive things, honestly, for CJ Stroud. I get it. Don't have Tank Dell. You moved on from Stephon Diggs, who got hurt, but at least they did try to spend some of their offseason capital, both in free agency and in the draft, on the wide receiver room.
I do love the fact that Noel really kind of is that same archetype as Christian Kirk. This is not just this underneath slot maven who, is only going to make you miss after the catch. He actually tied Patriots rookie wide receiver Kyle Williams for the most catches of at least 20 plus yards. I should say 20 yards thrown downfield of any Power 5 wide receiver last season. So obviously the round 3 draft capital versus the round 2 for his teammate Jaden Higgins. We are leaning towards Higgins, but I remember before the draft, Dwayne, there were a lot of people that actually were more so team Noah over Higgins. Is worth mentioning, because right now there's this kind of wild storyline going on with the second round picks in the NFL. Higgins is one of, I believe, only 2 that have actually signed so far, because NFL teams, Dwayne, they don't have enough money to give these guys guaranteed deals. Okay. It's just all these owners are so broke, they just can't do it. But Higgins did get his fully guaranteed deal. So again, unlike a lot of second round picks, he has actively, already been in the organizations, and assumingly CJ Stroud's good graces as well. Last point here, Christian Kirk, this year's Darnell Mooney, potentially, Dwayne, the wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6, who we look up early on and say, oh yeah, crap, this dude's going to be a wide receiver 3 for us this year.
Yeah, I think it's a great call. He's not someone that I've been, that I'm super excited about in managed leagues. Right. It's fine, but we're really looking more for, I'm swinging for even more upside in managed leagues, because if I miss, I can address it on the waiver wire. Right. There's still other moves that I can make. But in best ball, man, I do like Christian Kirk. I think that there's going to be weeks where he's just going to he'll probably run into a couple of wide receiver 1 performances. To your point, going to give you some wide receiver 3 outputs as well. And just where he goes in drafts, and you get to a range where it's honestly, he really sticks out, because you're looking at all the names, you're like, okay, unproven, don't know about their role, and you're like, oh, Christian Kirk. I'm not 100% on what his role is going to be, but he's going to be one of the top 3 wide receivers on the Texans, and he has shown it before. And he's not in an age bucket where we think that he's just going to hit a cliff. Right? He can still be productive.
Moving right along to this backfield now, Joe Mixon was someone who regularly, I think, was in a lot of people's, conversation as a top 12, worst case 15 running back a few short months ago. However, the signing of Nick Chubb has potentially thrown some cold water on that. So I was thinking this morning, Dwayne, are we really going to let Nick Chubb in the year 2025 be someone to push Mixon down the ranks? Because again, if they had drafted, a round 6 or a round 7 running back, I don't think we really would have cared. And after, again, these brutal injuries, you could say that Nick Chubb is not going to be that same player, and accordingly should be treated similarly to, a day 3 rookie or something. So thoughts on, again, just how big of a thorn the side of, Mixon managers that Nick Chubb could actually be.
Well, I tend to agree. I don't think like Chubb's going to immediately come in and take over this huge role, but I do think he's just good enough. Even if his efficiency is not great, like he's going to be one of these players, man, that coaches like. Remember when Frank Gore like just wasn't good for like the last 5 years of his career, and he still kept getting the ball? I think that's how the team's going to feel about Nick Chubb, and it's just enough that I think you have to give a slight haircut to the projections that we had for Joe Mixon. And if you look at Mixon, really, how did he come through for us last year? Dude, it was crazy volume. I mean, the dude was getting 70 and 80%, sometimes 90% of the team's rushing attempts. So I think the presence of Chubb is enough. Will it happen or not? We don't know for sure. But I do think that the presence of Chubb is enough that, like, you have to expect a little bit less for Mixon. So if you look at where I came out with Mixon in the projections after the addition of Chubb, I've got him down to 59% of the rushing attempts. Last year, you know, if you look at him, he had 74%. So I did give some of those to Chubb. Now, guys, the average for a running back one in the NFL going back over the last 3 years is 57% of their team's attempts. So I still have Mixon above that. I still have him getting his passing down work, 40% route participation. I don't think Nick Chubb is going to steal any of that. Going to have to keep an eye on Woody Marks, who might take over that Dare Ogunbowale role and do a little bit there. But I think it's just enough that I did move Mixon down the ranks a little bit. And here's the one last thing I would like to ask you, Ian, because I was like you. I thought, okay, Nick Chubb last year. So he had the ACL, MCL injury in early 2023. He was coming back from that 2024, ultimately another year that ended with, you know, an injury. 3.3 yards per carry. That's terrible. 2.7 yards after contact. Not ideal. 20% missed tackles force, minus 0.25 rushing yards over expected per carry. Only 5% of his carries went for 10 plus yards. So that explosive rush rate. Having said that, he's now a full year removed from that. Okay. He's going to be 29.7 years old. And I'm just wondering, are we so sure? Because here's what the prime of Nick Chubb was. Okay. And this was over a 5-year period. The dude had a really long prime. 5.3 yards per carry. Okay. Every one of those years, he had over 5 yards per carry, a 16% explosive rush rate. That's freaking phenomenal. And he had a plus 1.13 rushing yards over expected per attempt. So a year removed from the surgery, I think there's a better than zero chance that Nick Chubb's going to be better than last year. And because like he was so good, even a washed version of Nick Chubb could still be basically as good as Joe Mixon, like in an efficiency department, if we're talking about yards per carry and things like that. I'm not saying it's guaranteed to happen, but I kind of feel like we're just writing it off. Most guys at this point, we're like, we kind of give them that 2-year window of grace after a bad injury like what Chubb suffered, but we're not doing it with him. We're just like, oh man, no, he's washed. And I'm like, golly, like those are some really huge numbers. And even if he took a step down, like he could be a 4 to 4.2 yards per carry kind of guy. And again, if he does that, like you could also just see the Texans say, we don't want to load up Joe Mixon as much as we did last year because it did lead. Well, we don't know that it led to the injuries, but he battled some injuries. So again, I don't expect Chubb to force this split backfield, but I do think he is good enough that we could just see this ceiling for Mixon no longer be 70 to 80% of the rushing attempts in a game, which, guys, it's just absolutely insane. You just rarely see those type of numbers. Obviously, Chase Brown did it in a perfect run out last year. Jonathan Taylor's done it a couple of times. But to see Mixon and a guy that is his caliber of talent, like I don't know why a team would want to force that.
I'm just wondering with this whole, he's an extra year removed from the injury. Why does Chubb get that benefit of the doubt when for any other running back, we'd be like, he's going to be 30 in December. I mean, this dude is going to be cooked sooner rather than later. Is Javonte Williams just a couple more years removed from his injury? Like, how is coming back from your injury, getting another 100 plus touches, getting your knee hit how many more times, all of a sudden a good thing? I mean, do we have data on this?
Well, I mean, you've had more time to heal. Like it takes your body time to heal.
More hits.
Yeah, but most of the doctors tell you you're 90% in your year one, 70 to 90% in year one after this injury, right? And then 2 years later, you can be at 100%. So, I mean, it's just, I get what you're saying, more hits, more carries, yada, yada, yada. But at the same time, like he has had more time to heal. Dude, I'm just saying, look, Nick Chubb was a 5 yard per carry player and everybody's writing him off like he's going to be this 3.5 yards per carry. If you had to make me choose between those two numbers, I bet he beats 3.5 this year. I bet he has more yards per carry this year than Joe Mixon. I'm not saying he's getting more carries, but I bet he has more yards per carry this year than Joe Mixon, which, guys, by the way, it's not like a very big bar. Like Joe Mixon's not known for his efficiency. He's just known as a guy that teams know they can load him up and keep him on the field.
To Mixon's credit, was a little bit better in the efficiency market. Managed to forecast the RB19 last year, rushing yards over expected per carry. Previously hadn't, cracked the 24th best mark in the league over this last 4 years. So I will say there's a little bit of DeAndre Swift here with Mixon, where I think it's kind of funny how last year CJ Stroud couldn't do anything because of the scheme and the offensive line. That's what happened to Caleb Williams as well. And then you get to the running back, and you would think that those two variables would also kind of impact their performance, but it doesn't seem like, again, they get the same benefit of the doubt as their quarterback. So Mixon, again, he was the RB2 in PPR points per game last year before the fantasy playoffs started, behind only Saquon Barkley. And that was despite dealing with a high ankle sprain that actually happened into him, week 2 and forced him out of action for a little bit. So Joe Mixon, maybe someone I've been a little bit higher on over the years than you, Dwayne. I don't think those Bengals offensive lines necessarily did him a ton of favors as well. But long story short, not that Chubb's money that he got just 1 year, $2.5 million is anything to be too worried about. But we do have a new, changing of the guard at offensive coordinator. It is a situation where I don't think this offensive line is going to be fantastic. So it's one of these, rock and a hard place where even if Chubb is going to be a little bit involved, I don't think he's going to be someone that we can really hang our hat on. And Joe Mixon, accordingly, not going to have that same workhorse role that he needed to overcome this offensive environment last year. So he's my RB20. He's your RB19. I do see we are on a slightly different wavelength. I have Alvin Kamara ahead of Mixon. You have him one spot behind. How close are you with those two, or is it more of a same tier type of thing?
It's the same thing. I feel a little bit better about Mixon still having his role at the end of the year, right? I just have less implosion vibes, right, around the Texans versus what we have with the Saints. Just looking at their projected win total, and pretty much every data point that we look at says that the Saints are probably going to be pretty terrible. I am interested in your thoughts around the offensive line overhaul because we have 4 new starters versus September of last year. Funny story, I opened up Our Lads. Guys, great service for really keeping up depth charts, but I opened them up side by side, and I had the September from last year versus this year, and I thought maybe the electricity on my entire block was going to go down due to all the ads that were popping up. So there might have been a national security alert. I'm just saying. But whenever you look at the starters versus last year, 4 new ones, but some of it's like, okay, you lose Laramie Tunsil, okay, who had been a good player, was underperforming last year. You replace him with Cam Robinson. They also drafted, I'm going to get this name wrong, so just tell me if you know it, Ian, but it's Ariante Erseri out of Minnesota in round 2. Kenyon Green is now Laken Tomlinson. Juice Scruggs, who's a guy they had high hopes for at center, is now Jarrett Patterson. Shaq Mason, you guys remember him from the Patriots. He is now Titus Howard, who kicks inside from left tackle. And then their second round pick from 2024, Blake Fisher, is going to take over at left tackle. So we've got 4 new starters and plus 4 new players on the offensive line. They also signed Trent Brown as a potential backup option if something else doesn't happen here. So it's like, I look at it and I'm like, well, it wasn't good and they made a lot of changes, but I don't know if the changes are going to be good. Like I'm not really sure. I'm hopeful, but this is going to make the offensive line better, but interested in your thoughts.
It's one of these things, man, where, I guess it can't really get worse, so good on them for shuffling. But based on what we have to measure these offensive linemen, which, yes, people happen to be FF grades, okay? Yeah. None of these guys are really improvements. They replaced them with a bunch of dudes who were also mediocre to outright bad. I remember it was one of the things we kind of went through during free agency where it's like, okay, we're shuffling bodies, but are these guys actually better? And, I know some of you are saying, oh, my God, you're going off a PFF grade. Just watch the film. You are a better football fan than I am if you just have this, intuitive knowledge in your head about where every single offensive lineman ranks throughout the league. Okay. If you have that, more power to you. I try to use other sources who are zeroed into that. So accordingly, shout out Scott Barrett. They do obviously great stuff over there at Fantasy Points and Per. Scott D. Benedetto, apologies. He is a 10-year NFL scout, Dwayne, former basically just an offensive line wonder kid, apparently. He ranks the Texans as the worst offensive line entering the league next year. Okay, so it's one of these things where, again, hey, you re-racked, good enough job. But same thing with Nick Caley. All right. What is the allure here with Nick Caley? He spent 2 years as the tight end coach for Sean McVay. He must be Sean McVay. Okay. If that's the case, how come every single offense in the league isn't just wonderful because at some point or the other, they have been, touched by a great offensive mastermind? So he spent the previous, 10 years of his career in New England. I feel like, the Josh McDaniels protege isn't as sexy to say as the Sean McVay one. So again, Nick Caley could be great. The offensive line could be great, but man, judging on where they were at last year, judging on not a ton of additions that we can just say are high priced or meaningful draft capital, it seems like a bit of a reach for me at a minimum to assume they're going from very bad to anything close to good.
Yeah, I'm with you on the Nick Caley thing. I will say this: like, if I'm Caley, I'm probably trying to let McVay rub off on me more than McDaniels. Well, I mean, we'll see what happens with that. But like, just real quickly back to the receivers, I think the thing that could be positive here is if we look at the McVay, tree over the last 3 years, 90% of the time they've been in 11 personnel, and then you think about what the moves they made in the offseason match up with that. They go get Christian Kirk, they draft Jaden Higgins. And then they also draft Jalen Noel. So they've put themselves in a position. Obviously, it sucks, right, that we're not going to have Tank Dell this year. But they put themselves in a position to create some camp battles for those wide receiver spots. And potentially, if things work out, right, they can run more 3 wide receiver sets, which would open up things for those wide receivers and potentially mean a little bit more passing for CJ Stroud. So I'm with you. I don't think we should like overrate what Nick Caley's going to be, but I'm hopeful, right, that some of the things that he got from McVay, because McVay knows how to punch up those cheat buttons of motion and play action and all that kind of stuff. There is a chance that Caley did pick those things up, and it does help the offense some.
Did you notice, though, that Slovic really wasn't that bad in some of those play action and pre-snap shift motion things? I really do feel like more than ever, Dwain, our interpretations and our opinions on play callers, it's more reactive than almost anything else in football. It's like we watch football for 4 weeks. Oh, okay, the number 1 scoring offense in the league. You just start breaking down plays. Meanwhile, I hear someone like Mike McDaniel talk about how overrated the ideas of play callers is in the first place. And I think he knows a good thing or two about the aspect of the job. Just speaking of his experience about how, the amount of time he's called a play he thought was going to be fantastic and it turns into a horrific turnover, or vice versa. So again, I just have a hard time believing that Bobby Slowick goes from being such a great answer in 2023, someone who was getting legit head coach interest. Not saying he did a good job in 2024. I watched the offense. I understand there were too many early down runs. I do think that is a data point you could hang your hat on, but just, it's one of these things, man, where can we really just say that, they changed the play caller to another guy? Like, is that it? Because I feel like if they're going to take a step forward, probably going to have to be more so CJ Stroud and company. And accordingly, let's get into that conversation with CJ Stroud.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's a combination like of those things, but I'm looking at CJ Stroud just real quick on the play caller stuff. There are certain cheat codes that we know work, right? I mean, we've studied it, we've gone back, and we've looked at the last 10 years. So motion is added for fantasy points per route, fantasy points per target. Play action also does the same thing. And when you think about it, it makes sense. You're giving your player an advantage when the ball is snapped versus the defender that they're playing against. You're changing the look, just like defenses are trying to change the look with their rotating safeties. Play action, Ian, you've been a linebacker. What do you have to do? You have to worry about your run fit. That's going to hold you just a second longer. That leaves a player in a bigger space. That can lead to more yak. There's all sorts of things that do point to play calling really mattering. Now, it's not like you can just, everyone start doing this and it's going to work. I think sequencing of play calling is probably the most underrated thing. I haven't found a good way to measure that, but that's really where you're setting things up. You're giving one look early so that you can set the other play up later. I think the other thing that's really hard to judge is the play callers that know how to adjust their play calling in the course of a game based on maybe a defense is just really giving them different looks than what they planned on all week long. So I think a lot of things go into that, being, someone that can, think on your feet, make those switches, all sorts of things like that. But to your point with CJ Stroud, I will say this. I really thought, like, coming into this, I was going to have him ranked higher. Not coming into the show, but coming into the season, I was going to have him ranked higher, just thinking, look, I know it was a bad year last year, but he was so good as a rookie. And as you guys can see here on the screen, his fantasy points per game went from 18.4 down to 12.9. Jesus, is that a real number? 12.9. CJ, come on, man. That is so sad. 274 yards passing per game to 219 yards per game. So, and even though he did have that really good year one, the challenge that I started to run into, Ian, is all the other quarterbacks right around him that I also like. Like, I like Justin Herbert. I like Jordan Love. I like Dak Prescott. I like Trevor Lawrence. And so I think you could argue like the upside for CJ Stroud is in the same range as those guys, but I ultimately ended up just ranking him a little bit below them. I've got him right now as my QB 21. Like, I'm not going to rank him at QB 28 because I think the truth is somewhere between what he did as a rookie and what he did last year. The big difference from year one to year two is the efficiency fell off. 8.2 yards per attempt as a rookie down to 7.0 in year 2. The touchdowns per attempt fell from 4.6%, which is just average for an NFL starter, all the way down to 3.8%. So the touchdowns weren't really coming through. We've already talked about the offensive line. That was a nightmare. If you think about the strengths of CJ Stroud, it's buying some time in the pocket, really stepping up and then hitting that big throw late down the field. Almost Joe Burrow-esque. He has some things about him that are like Joe Burrow whenever you think about, trying to make that big play and being willing to step up in the pocket. Struggled a little bit with the way he was managing the pocket early last year, but I thought that got better as the season went on. Again, we already mentioned the receivers. We don't know if all these receivers will be good, Ian. We know we have one elite receiver in Nico Collins, but they at least tried to address the room with the draft picks plus Christian Kirk. And again, we'll see. I'm with you. I think Slowick kind of became like the whipping post boy. It's just like this. I don't know if it's going to end up being a red herring or not, but it's something that they pointed to. It's just being like, okay, this is all on Slowick. And I kind of am with you. I mean, are we really so sure that from one year to the next that there was that big of a difference? But when you look at the offensive line, that's unsolved. We just talked about it. We don't really know if it's going to be better or bad. So the one thing I think we can say is they did try to go give CJ Stroud more weapons. And so that's the one big positive. So it wouldn't surprise me if he challenged for like a high-end QB2 finish to a low-end QB1. I think that's in his range of outcomes. It's really going to depend on his spike as a passer. He does just enough as a rusher that he's above like the Tuas and the Goffs as far as what he can do. But really going to come down to, can he have a spike season as a passer?
And again, maybe the issue with Slowick was just, hey, you didn't do a good enough job with this offensive line. And yeah, the play sequencing thing, that is a great point. I understand that's part of it. But you would just think for as much grief as this guy has got that we'd have, better quantifiable ways of just doing this. I've seen some people put out play caller rankings, and yeah, he does rank, near the bottom of the league. I'm sure a lot of that just has to do with the offense kind of ranking near the bottom of the league, which is on him. I get it. But man, early down pass play rate, Texans were 17th last year. Overall play action drop back rate, 13th. Pre-snap shift motion rate, they were 6th in the league. So again, I just wonder if we really have those easy buttons to all of a sudden make this big switch when, for Kellen Moore and the Eagles last year, it was like, oh, yeah, this is great. Look how they never use motion. Now they can actually use some. It just doesn't seem to be that cut and dry. Mentioned the offensive line, but yeah, man, Cam Robinson, Ed Ingram, Laken Tomlinson, none of them ranked higher than 49th at their position last year. We have Trent Brown, who's 32, coming off a torn patella tendon. Maybe, their 48th overall pick actually should have gone first overall, Dwain. Maybe they just got the second round steals. Okay, did they bring in some new offensive line coach who's just, absolutely going to help fix this unit? Maybe they fired Chris Strouser, and they promoted their previous assistant offensive line coach, Cole Popovich, into the role. So hopefully he's related to Greg Popovich and we can get some good stuff going there. But again, that's my big issue with CJ Stroud. That's why I don't have him higher. QB 20 for me, QB 21 for you. That said, I think I drafted him more than any quarterback just because of, again, my previously mentioned love for getting Nico Collins, and you can stack him up easy enough late. But man, I still do generally think that Stroud is going to be a great real life quarterback though, Dwain, because again, you do look at last year, PFF does assign pressure, blame basically, so you can see what quarterbacks invited up more than others, the Caleb Williams of the world, even someone like Lamar Jackson, who is just so effective under pressure that, yeah, he invites it, but who cares? Look what he does with it. CJ Stroud's right there with Geno Smith and some of these other guys in terms of, yeah, they're under pressure a lot, not always their fault. So maybe not the sort of quarterback we should be going out of our way to target, but again, in that group, we saw the upside as a rookie, who doesn't have a sophomore slump from time to time. Obviously, that slump did impact tight end one Dalton Schultz here, who got a nice contract extension by the end of last year. Unfortunately, could not replicate the 2023 magic, which just kind of ended up being a borderline tight end one finish. So we have seen it. Also had a couple okay years with Dak Prescott and everything. If you want to go ahead and use your third tight end pick, you're in a tight end premium league and you just want to get another guy late, I think Schultz is fine with that, but everyone has him ranked outside the top 20. Dwain, do you really think we should be going out of our way for this dude when, again, the ceiling is what, tight end 10, tight end 11?
No, I don't think we should be going out of our way for Dalton Schultz. I think what Schultz has shown us to this point in his career, Ian, is if he's in an offense where there's really just one other target earner, and we saw that in Dallas for a couple of years, like he can be an 18 to 19% guy, right? And in that scenario, like you can come in as a low end tight end one. So again, this really all goes back to how well does Christian Kirk play? How well does Jaden Higgins play? How well does Jalen Noel play? And I feel like between the three of those guys, one of them is going to be better than Dalton Schultz. So now it's Nico Collins plus someone else, and it could be two of those guys better than Dalton Schultz. It could easily be Jaden Higgins plus Christian Kirk being better than Dalton Schultz. And obviously we've got Nico Collins doing his thing. And then that would just not be, that would be really terrible for Dalton Schultz. Then he's the number 4 option on the offense. So yeah, you don't want him in redraft, tight end premium. You might take him late, playing in best ball. Like you said, you're the 3rd tight end. I will say though, last year towards the end of the year, where sometimes, teams start to try to get a look towards the next year, I get a little bit concerned about his route participation, because he had been hurt a little bit early in the year, but then he got to a stretch where it was 91, 84, 82% route participation. Then we got to the end of the year and it was 67, 78, and in the playoff game, 68%. And they were giving more of that work to Cade Stover. And so when you look at Cade Stover, and we're talking about a player that, was drafted in round 4 of 2024, maybe they're looking to give him a little bit more work. So I have a slight concern that because the one thing we think about with Schultz is we can pencil him in for 75% of the routes. I don't know. I think there's a tad of risk with Dalton Schultz even getting that. So not a guy that I've been drafting very often, even in best ball.
Cade Stover, certainly a receiving friendly tight end from the Ohio State University, was called Farmer Gronk, Yeah. Farmer Gronk during his time in Columbus, kind of had that, elbow thing going on a while. Dwain, I would love to see Brevin Jordan get more of a chance, all right? Every time this dude touches the ball, he looks like the best, athlete they have at the position, from the U himself back in the day. Even Luke Lachey, I believe, he went to Iowa, okay? Who cares that he was a 7th-round pick? My man just went to Iowa. Again, Dalton Schultz, someone where even in those later stages, give me Mike Gesicki, give me Cade Otton, give me Jawan Johnson, and I don't think it's overly close. So it takes us to the win total. Dwain sitting there, 9.5, doesn't exactly scream Super Bowl contender, but hey, it's telling. And I heard Peyton Manning say this recently, don't call C.J. Stroud's second season a disappointment when the man still managed to win the division, still managed to get a playoff win. As Peyton mentions, I think it took him until year 6 to get a playoff win. Imagine how that would have gone over, in today's social media age. So honestly, I know we haven't said a ton of good things about this offense taking a step forward, but again, we're focusing on the fantasy side of things. And I still think this defense, man, is a potential game-wrecking unit. Will Anderson looks like he's poised to join that Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Micah Parsons conversation, if he's not already, right in the middle of it. You got the Danielle Hunter there, obviously got some studs in the secondary with Stingley, added CJ Gardner-Johnson. Give me over 9.5 wins. I don't think the rest of this division is, I'm not overly worried about the other squads either, so that plays a part of it. So again, maybe expecting the Texans offense to be more middle of the road, but I think the defense could be a legit top 5 group. You add it all together in a not that strong division, I think we can get at least 10 wins out of here. What say you?
No, give me the over as well. If I have to look at this division and say who is the best quarterback in it, I would still pick CJ Stroud, right? Yeah. And you basically read my show sheet. Number 7 last year in PFF coverage grade, they had invested a lot into their coverage unit over the last few years in the draft. And then to your point, they added CJ Gardner-Johnson. I know bounces around. Maybe there's some personality stuff, but dude, everywhere that guy goes, he seems to play well. So him with Stingley and Lassiter and then Petrie, they've invested in that secondary. And then, like you mentioned, when you pair a secondary that can play like that with the pass rush of Will Anderson and then Danielle Hunter, and you have good things. DeMeco Ryans, I also think a pretty good defensive coordinator, Ian. So I am going to go with the over as well for the Texans.
You guys heard it here, and we hope you will continue to hear us on the Fantasy Live Show. Like and subscribe for that kind of thing. We're going through all 32 team previews, talk about a great day to be great. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Live Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.